Well, I only have a bachelor's degree in psychology, which is about as useless as an expired real estate license. But I've heard a lot of people say that it's pretty difficult sometimes to find a therapist that will only use evidence-based therapy. Um, like I said, I've never really needed therapy myself, so I don't know that firsthand, but I've spoken to several people that have said that. So it is kind of difficult. And it's not only religion, it's anything that's non-evidence based. If you're talking to a therapist that's talking about karma, you know, that's not going to do you much good. If they're talking about crystals or new age stuff, there's nothing wrong with being into new age stuff, but it's not therapy. So again, these therapists only use evidence-based therapy.
Okay. And if say you had a therapist that you think might be a good fit for the secular therapy project, or maybe there's a therapist that's interested in having their name submitted, how would they go about doing that?
It's fairly easy. You just go to recoveringfromreligion.org, click on the Secular Therapist Project, and there's a big button that says, I'm a therapist. You click on that, you fill out the stuff, and they'll interview you. And if you're what they're looking for, you'll be a part of that database and probably gain clients because of it.
Okay. And why would you need, at least as far as, I know I had asked earlier why you might need a evidence-based therapy, but why would a therapist not want to put that on their shingle, on the sign outside the door saying that they are an evidence-based therapist or they're a secular therapist? Is there some kind of a stigma attached to that in particular, or?
It depends where you live. If you're living in a small conservative town and you're known as only using evidence-based therapy, there could be some people that could treat you different because you're perceived as being an atheist. And these 280 therapists, they're not all necessarily atheists. I'm sure quite a few of them aren't, but they will only use evidence-based therapy. And, you know, I would say that's the biggest reason that they want business. They are therapists, but they're a small business as well. And if you're not doing business, you won't be in business very long. So depending on the town you're living in, maybe you don't want that on your shingle.
Okay. Well, just to kind of shift gears a little bit, because I know I'm in particular interested in these kind of things, but as far as your background, what was your story as far as your move into free thought, being a secularist, and how did that start, and what was your journey like?
Well, it took most of my life. I'm a very slow learner, I guess. But I remember getting kicked out of Sunday school when I was about 9 years old. I kept asking questions, and the answers just didn't satisfy me. And I just kept asking more questions. And I noticed that the Sunday school teachers would lengthen out the lesson and kind of repeat themselves so there wouldn't be time for questions. So I swear I was not that annoying kid. And I certainly wasn't a genius kid by any means, but I thought I was pretty hot stuff being a 9-year-old, and I'm influencing this adult's lesson. So I started asking questions anyway. So at that time, I was interrupting. So it was considered rude. So it was decided between the preacher, my parents, who were not too happy, and myself that I probably should not attend Sunday school anymore. But we did continue to attend worship service. And you know, I had to sit and be still. I couldn't ask questions during worship service. That's really rude. So it just, I always had questions. And the preacher at the time was very tall, old, very intimidating. So a 9 or 10-year-old is not going to ask this guy anything. So for the longest time, I had all these questions. My parents couldn't answer these questions. They didn't know a whole lot about religion. So these questions just went unanswered as a kid. And my first wife was a daughter of a Southern Baptist minister. I don't know what the hell I was thinking there, but I got to be on the inside of the church for the first time. And that's the first time I realized the church was actually a business. You can say it's more than a business, but it's certainly a business. And they do things to stay in business that I didn't really like seeing very much. And in college, another thing, my roommate pointed out that the Bible said that a woman was not allowed to teach a man anything. And I said, that's BS. Most of my teachers were female. And I lost a $5 bet. He pointed that out, and there it was in black and white. He pointed out a couple other things that weren't so good coming out of the good book. And after that, I thought, maybe I should read this. And I read it from cover to cover. And I was amazed what I was reading. And it's one thing to get on Google and look something up about what the Bible says about women, but it's a totally different feeling when you're actually reading a hard copy of the Bible and you run across a verse like that. It has anything to do with treating women differently or condoning rape or slavery or genocide. It just really kind of hits you if you're actually reading a Bible. And after that, my wife and I, after much discussion, after about 7 years of marriage, both came to the conclusion at the same time that we were atheists. And we kind of avoided a lot of problems that couples usually have when there's a deconversion process. Not too many deconverge at the same time, and there's a lot of times friction. My parents were dead by that time, so I didn't have that issue with coming out. And I didn't have a job that I had to worry about a boss or customer. So I kind of got off pretty lucky when I think about it. But like I said, it took decades to work through this deconversion process. At no time up to the very end of the deconversion process did I even entertain the notion that I could label myself an atheist. But when I did, it felt pretty good. There wasn't any guilt, shame, or anything like that. So I consider myself pretty lucky. I didn't have to go through all the issues that people on the hotline seem to have to go through.
Yeah, I've heard some pretty scary stories as well from my end. I've asked for them when I've done a couple of shows, and had some pretty heartbreaking ones. I've been pretty lucky that even though my parents are fundamentalist Pentecostals, they've since I've deconverted in my early 40s, it's a little bit different from as a teenager maybe coming up and saying something about it. So they're a little bit more, I wouldn't say accepting of it, but they don't push the agenda quite as much. But I've heard of some people that their family would completely disown them. One woman, her kids wouldn't talk to her for the longest time after she deconverted. So yeah, there's quite a few stories, and there seems to be a stigma with being an atheist that I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah, and we get a lot of calls from the hotline from younger people under 25. Some of them come back during the holidays from college, and there's all kinds of friction, and everyone knows they're atheist, and they're kind of forced to go to church sometimes and bite their tongue and play nice. Sometimes Christmas is International Bite Your Tongue Day for an atheist, and it's definitely not the time to come out. Definitely not the time to debate. It's Christmas time, everyone's together, but sometimes it doesn't go that smoothly. But we hear a lot of stories in the hotline that are actually very heartbreaking, but we also hear some pretty funny stories too. And we hear stories that I think make our agents smarter. I know they've made me smarter. So that's kind of a secondary benefit from volunteering on the hotline. The first one, of course, is helping people who need that help. But the secondary benefit is we get to kind of have our fingers on the pulse of what's going on out there. We know what typically happens when a kid comes out to their very religious parents. We hear those stories, so we kind of know what's going on. And we learn a lot of stuff that we really had no clue about, like maybe Mormons or something like that. I mean, if we were Baptists and then deconverted, we know a lot about Baptists already, but maybe we don't know very much about Mormons or anything like that. So we probably get a little bit smarter by working on the hotline as well.
As far as deconversion stories that you guys hear on the hotline, I know there's a lot of stereotypes that people that become atheists, they're for some reason, whatever, they've been hurt, or they're angry at God for this or that, or they've had a pastor that did something. What are some of the most common reasons that you've heard that kind of flip that switch for people?
The common reasons that actually get them to convert, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that cause them, if not to out and out become an atheist, then at least to kickstart the process of losing their faith.
I see. Well, 25 years ago, before the internet or social media or anything like that, there wasn't a whole lot of resources if you wanted to explore something totally different than what you were used to, not necessarily religion, but anything. Now, if I wanted to take a class on underwater basket weaving, I could probably find out on the internet and watch a few YouTube videos and, learn how to do it. And it's the same way with deconversion. Okay, nowadays, there's resources out there that can show you a different side. So if you've never been an atheist and kind of wonder what it's like to be an atheist, you can find out really quick. So I think that helps people out a whole lot. But as far as personal stories that pushes them over the edge, a lot of it, I'm just thinking stuff off the top of my head, there's still a lot of preachers, a lot of religions that say if you're gay, there's something wrong with you. The devil's inside of you. And the younger generation is saying, wait a second, that's just not true. I got a gay friend, and he's super cool. There's just something wrong here. And that gets people to think. And that's the one thing that religion doesn't really want you to do. It doesn't want you to think. Because if you just believe and not think, you won't change. But if you start thinking about it and questioning about it, it's very possible that you might leave it. And I can't tell you how many sermons I've sat through where the main theme is don't think about it, just believe it. Mm-hmm. I've had people tell me, hey, you need to believe in the Bible before you read it. Now, to me, that's kind of like buying a new car and taking it for a test drive. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think in all, it's just getting people to think. They watch Cosmos on TV with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and hey, that doesn't jive with the Bible, and it just gets them to think. So I think probably having resources out there and getting people to think is probably the greatest thing that gets people to move away from their faith.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I know that my own deconversion, when it happened, it was really quick, but it was after years of just studying. I'm one of those Robert Price style Bible geeks that I just love digging into the history, and the more that I learned, it seemed like the less plausible everything seemed, until finally it was a Josh Feuerstein video that my stepmother had posted on Facebook that finally just drove me over the edge.
He'll do it, yeah.
I don't know what is up with that gentleman.
Hey, I'm sure he'll be back this Christmas. I can't wait. Can't wait to see what the Starbucks coffee cup looks like this year.
Well, I'm wondering if they're going to have a special Christmas semen latte. That should be interesting.
Ew.
Yeah, get Josh Feuerstein and David Manning in the same room together and see what they come up with. Maybe they can brainstorm something.
Yeah, and I went to Starbucks after all the press says, people ordering drinks would say their name's Merry Christmas, so the employees would have to shout out Merry Christmas when their drink was ready. Mm-hmm. I didn't see anything like that at all. People went in, got their coffee, sat down, or left. There wasn't any to do. It was business as usual. I think the press just needs something to talk about. Yeah. So they blew that up way out of proportion.
Well, they tend to do that with everything with the 24-hour news cycle, but I think right up until about for the next 3 weeks, they're probably going to have plenty to talk about with the circus that's going on right now that we're calling an election.
Is this an election year?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's. I'm not sure. I think it's Ernie from Sesame Street is running.
You think it'd be on the news, wouldn't you?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
Well, one other thing I wanted to get into, and I know it's going to be kind of a touchy subject because this just broke over the weekend, but the whole thing with Teresa MacBane and her going back to her former faith as a Methodist. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit? Can we take some time for that, or?
Yeah, I'm going to have to pour a drink here. There we go. Yeah, it happens sometimes. It doesn't happen every day. It's kind of rare, but it does happen. The thing that makes this maybe unusual is, she used to be Atheist of the Year a couple of years ago. She used to be the director of our Hotline project. So she was a pretty well-known atheist, former pastor, and then for whatever reason, she decided to go back to her church. And the way we operate on the Hotline, we don't talk anyone in or out of anything. If we're talking